No, I was sorry.
Okay.
Did I insult her?
Apparently. Is that it? What happened to your promotion?
So the purpose is, doesn't work, but
Hold on.
Well, as Popeye would say, this is embarrassing.
It just needs to be
Maybe
tried.
we should leave the door open and people will wander in. Barricade on this side of the door.
You pull that
I
hood off
think
your
you're
face.
ready this one.
that's wrong. Yeah.
Because we have no audio visual.
Barry, you will be.
And no slides this time.
No.
That's so expensive.
Camera.
You're charging him.
Oh, you're in the right room.
Saved! We need every person we can get.
I think everybody that's gonna watch it is on the.
They didn't read the program.
You're in charge of all of this.
So the purpose of this panel is to discuss with these gentlemen who worked directly with Jack Kirby, what the relationship was. There's always a lot of talk about how great Jack was and everything, but the day-to-day, the conversations that you had in the past, and what the experience was like working with Jack. What? Switch mic?
That belongs to me because it says switch to mic.
Oh, there's no two in the middle.
Oh. Well, let me introduce our host and moderator, Mr. Tom Pratt, an amazing website designer and heavily involved in the Jack Kirby Museum.
And at the end is Rand Hoppy. Hello. He's the executive director of the Jack Kirby Museum. Ray Wyman.
Hello, Ray Wyman.
Wyman, who worked on the Art of Jack Kirby book back in the early 90s. Had a 2-year period of interviewing. 3-year period of interviewing Jack.
Years of my life.
And how many years after that pushing the book was out?
Continues, yeah, it continues. And people, you know, they want to know why I made that mistake in the book, you know. Why did you say that?
And everybody knows Mike Royer, wonderful inker, one of the best inkers for Jack Kirby for 10 years, right?
Well, professionally, 10 years, knew him for at least 20. And later you can ask me about doing stuff with Jack and Roz, and one of the most entertaining lunches I ever had with Jack, Roz, myself, and Vern Hogarth.
Okay. And at the end, the wonderful Barry Geller,
Actually, my name is Mike Royer.
who partnered with Jack Kirby in the late 70s with Science Fiction Land, a huge project where Jack they collaborated together to create architectural drawings for an amusement park and a movie that was going to be produced that never ended up happening.
Except for the CIA.
Except for the CIA, who used the drawings to help convince that they were a movie studio to free the hostages in Iran in 1980?
1979.
1979. You want to start, Barry?
Sure. You know, when I first approached Jack, I'm sure I was living in a different universe than most people. I just went there because I felt, well, like he's the only person that I would want to do the rights to Lord of Light that I had just purchased. And I hadn't done a film before. I'd worked in television. Anyway, and it was like, hi Jack. And I've heard this, by the way, from a lot of people. And that he just, his integrity was so that he was very open to many, many people, and he would treat most people, too many people, I think, but as a complete equal, but compassionate. And it really was, my first impression was he was a very religious man. And we hit it off immediately because, well, we sort of both nuts. And I had the same or similar ideas.
What was the exchange like when you started the project? You would go to his house, or would he come to you?
No, no,
You'd go to his house?
I always go there,
Okay.
you know, it's the drive to Sackler Street.
Okay. And what was the relationship like when you started conversations? Was Jack open to ideas? How was the give and take? How was the conversation?
I can tell you, one time you asked me, what was it like?
Yes.
And I said, it was like talking to God. But it was also like being God. It was also like exploring one's godness and exploring a purity of consciousness and reality and imagination. I mean, all these great words, but I'll just say that preceded every session that we had, were more like sessions, was several hours of just ridiculous discussions about everything.
And there would be tangents and...
Tangents and intangibles.
Mhm.
And I get a feeling when he had gotten, it's too weird, but I would see this gleam in his, glow in his eyes. I'm sure all the gentlemen here have seen, you know, maybe would see that gleam. You ever see that?
Got a suntan on the ones, yeah.
In his eyes, though. It's like, you know, someone mentioned it at the earlier panel that he was very quiet at a dinner and then came back and wrote
I don't know, it was
The first issue of Demon.
Yes, right. And so it was very tangential. It's very hard to put down, but that we accomplished, we went through very, very specific areas. And I think it was all about how he would design for a theme park. These were all based on ideas for a theme park using Hindu architecture. I'll explain, I'll go later.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was a combination, the synergy of Hindu, of Mayan culture, everything, all these different types of gods put into one set of drawings. You can go through and point to different areas and say, well, that looks like Mayan, that looks like Hindu.
The initial terminal of the gods is very Mayan, and because he had just finished the Eternals. I mean, the previous year or two, but he was still looking at gods as, you know, as Icarus and that whole thing, and that, yeah.
And Mike, we talked a little bit about your process, because I was wondering, for instance, what happened. Like, did he get everything in the mail? Was there ever conversations or interactions with Jack? And you were mentioning a couple of things.
Well, when I met Jack, I had an audition that I call a baptism of fire, because, you know, I'd been recommended as a good anchor to Jack by Alex Toth, and Jack was looking for somebody on the West Coast to ultimately build the Jack Kirby Enterprises, where everything was written, drawn, lettered, inked, and colored on the West Coast. And I was recommended by Alex Toth, and I went up to Jack's, and he told me what he wanted me to do. He showed it to me, and it was the biography page for Marvel Mania, where he's sitting at the drawing board, the famous drawing where all the characters, including Spider-Man, are, circling off the board. And I said, okay, I'll bring it back tomorrow. And he says, no, why don't you just sit here and do it at my board? And it was like, whoa! Fortunately, because of the years of working with Russ Manning, I always had a separate set of tools in a shoebox in my car, which had everything I had at my drawing board and cabaret at home. So I went out to the car and I sat down at the board, and every 15, 20 minutes he'd come in and look over my shoulder. And Mark Evanier said that basically what he was doing was finding out if it was coming from my hand and how I would work under pressure. And I passed the test, met Roz and 2 of the 3 kids, and she made the legendary sandwiches. And I felt like I was now part of the Kirby family. And as a result of that, I inked from that point on practically 90% of anything he drew for Marvel Mania. The Marine Toys for Tots posters, some series of God's pictures and things. And I think it was late '68 I met him. And when I started working for him on the Fourth World books, which we're supposed to be talking about, when he went to DC, I was supposed to be part of the package. But I was an unknown quantity, and they had such a deal with Vince Coletta that it took his lobbying, thanks to Steve and Mark, to have me ink the books and letter them. And DC was positive that, okay, this kid will fail, you know, and I didn't. But our working relationship is that I had met with him and picked up drawings, and most of it was person to person, going to his house and back and so on. And we really didn't talk about, it wasn't like he'd hand me the Toys for Tots, say, I want you to think of such and such. It's, I want you to do this, how's the kids? You know, what's your wife doing, you know, and that sort of thing. And so the very first New Gods, which was number 5 that I inked, he sent with the old Postal Systems special delivery, you know. And I finished the book, and I think that one I took to him in person. And the next book, it would probably come special delivery, and I would take it back in person. Or it got to a point where every other book, it would come to me special delivery, I'd send it back, and the next one, I'd go to the house, pick it up, and go to the house and deliver it. And it was the kind of thing where there were times that I took my wife and kids with me. And Jack and I are at his board in his studio going over the pages, and Jack never really said anything about the work. It's just, they went through the pages, and you know, we'd look out at my kids swimming in this pool because they were AAU competitive swimmers and so on. And my wife was in the living room talking to Roz. And it was an unusual work situation because it wasn't like reporting to the boss. I really felt I worked with Jack. And the paychecks may have first come from DC and then Marvel. And before that it was, I don't know if he personally paid me for that Marvel Mania stuff. It's so long ago that, is it important? No, it's not important. But I worked with and for Jack. And the only time he ever said anything critical was when I was studying some of the artists at DC that were drawing girl comics, you know, with the gorgeous girl and so on, and I prettied up the face of Big Barda and Mr. Miracle #5. And apparently I had sent the book to him, and he called me and says, don't ever change the faces, Mike. It wasn't an angry, it was just, don't ever change the faces, Mike. And he was right, you know. And because he had an inker, unlike Joe Sinnott, who didn't pretty things up, I finished his statement in ink. And so it was an unusual, I guess, from the norm, since he, at least in theory, was in control and the editor of his books. So DC may have sent me the checks, but the work was for Jack. And over the years, there was a time that I got a little bit ahead, and I think maybe had Dee Bruce Berry some backgrounds for me, so that I could take a week off, because my wife came home one day. Am I talking to her? No. She came home one day and she says, you're going to be a backpacker. And I said, I am? She says, yeah, I've just volunteered to be the adult female chaperone for a Girl Scout cadet troop that has a male leader. So there has to be an adult woman. So for months, when there was a time for me to get away, I'd go on these shakedown hikes and overnighters and so on, and we did the 6-day Mount Whitney John Muir Trail trek, you know. Someday I'll post on Facebook the color photograph of me sitting on the plaque on the top of Mount Whitney, freezing to death. But I'm up there at the top of the world and I'm going, I am working too damn hard. And I came back and I told Jack, can I just ink half the books? And he said, no, all or none of them. Not in an angry way. It It was a matter-of-fact, realistic response because he did not want a variety of looks to the books. So we just kind of, in a friendly way, I wasn't working with him anymore. Don't ever ask me why just 3 or 4 months later, I'm back inking and lettering everything. I don't know how that happened. But during that 3 or 4 months, I wrote and drew a 44-page Jane Auden for you at Europe, drew a couple of 8 or 10-page Tarzan stories, one of which you have to come by my desk and ask to see the print that Tom did for me. I started my career in 1976, inking for Russ Manning, and in, 1965. And in 1975, he made an archival museum quality print of my pencils inked by Russ Manning. Anyway, so I'm back working for Jack again, and sometime early '79, I was offered work. You know, Russ said, "Will you work for me again? I'm going to be doing both the Tarzan Sunday page, the Star Wars Daily and Sunday, and you'll ink everything. You won't be assisting me." And I talked to Jack about it, and he understood that I wanted to stretch my muscles. Of course, I wasn't really stretching my muscles if I was just inking and lettering again. And one of my mentors called me and he says, "Disney needs somebody for their foreign strip division." And to make a long story short, after a couple months, and I was getting bored with inking and lettering Russ, I was offered a job at Disney. But in the next 10 years, I would see the Kirbys at amateur art shows that they would have in Orange County, and Jack would be a judge, and I'd be a judge, and Russ Manning. And the year that it was Russ Manning and Jack Kirby and Mike Royer, I was so lucky to be in that crowd, you know, and Vern Hogarth. And Vern Hogarth, Jack Kirby, Mike Royer, and Roz Kirby went to lunch. And it's probably the most memorable lunch I've ever had with professionals, because Vern Hogarth, uptown, erudite, $100 words, and Jack Kirby, East Side New York street fighter, the two of them argued philosophy, but they were saying the same thing, but they were arguing because it was two different languages. And for 90 minutes, Roz and I sat there and just grinned and rolled our eyes because it was so entertaining. I can't remember the details now, but it was the fact that they were friendly arguing. And we both realized they're saying the same thing, but in foreign languages.
So going back to when you and Jack would sit together at the house and go over the art, was there ever conversations about where he was going to take things or ask your opinion or anything like that?
No, and maybe I was just a dumb bunny, but I never asked Jack what's coming up next. Maybe it's because I wanted to be surprised. You know, when he'd give me a book and I'd really look at it when I got home, or when I opened a package, it's like, you know, aside from being hypnotized by the smell of Roy Tan cigars, it was like, don't screw this up, Mike. And I can't really explain why, but inking Jack Kirby was never hard for me. I just somehow knew exactly how I should finish those pencils. The only hard part was inking 3 pages a day, lettering a whole book, you know, and circling balloons and boarding panels and doing display lettering on 3 chapter pages in 2 days. But if it's anything to brag about, I'm the only inker that ever kept up with Jack as well as lettering.
It's crazy.
But after that, we were like friends. And of course, then there was another artist that got involved with the Kirby family, and so I was never asked to ink any of the drawings that Jack had done for his wife, and I put it all in the book, and then this guy published them, contacted inkers, since he didn't like me because I knew it was a phony. No names mentioned here. But I was never asked. I was not asked to Jack and Roz's 50th anniversary, wedding anniversary. I should have been there because I was extended Kirby family. But he sent out the invitations, so I didn't hear about it. But there would be these art shows and other things, and if I was in Thousand Oaks and called ahead of time and said, "Jack, can I come by and visit?" But what I remember, Jack, is not really the nuts and bolts, but that personal stuff that you wanted to know about. Sitting in the kitchen, eating Roz's homemade chocolate cake, drinking a glass of milk, and mostly talking about movies. Now, everybody that I talked to that knew Jack tell about how he told the war stories and talked about the war. Either he thought I was too numb to appreciate, I mean facetious, we mostly talked about movies. And that's how it became easy for me to say the difference between Joe Sinnott and Mike Royer. If you understand the motion picture studio dichotomy and the golden age, is Joe Sinnott inked Jack Kirby, MGM. Mike Royer inked Jack Kirby, Warner Brothers. Because I knew from, hell, my first conversations with Jack that on the comic book page he was Warner Brothers. He only put on the page the information that was necessary to sell the story and get across the raw power of what he wanted to accomplish. And when I say MGM, they would, you know, casts of hundreds and so much gloss and beautiful settings and big crowd scenes and of course my favorite movie period is pre-code. And to me, my favorite MGM films are where they are just doing a Warner Brothers movie on a big budget. And I do not wish to demean Joe Sinnott. I think Joe Sinnott influenced Jack Kirby, believe it or not. We all talk about the Kirby crackle.
Yeah.
And you talk to Kirby and say, oh, it's fun to do the Kirby crackle. But Kirby crackle was defined by Joe Sinnott, because those shapes were very indistinct. They were just shapes. And Joe Sinnott took a speedball B5 and connected circles at the edges. So they had that it looked great. So instantly when I started inking Jack, that was the way you would do Jack's crackle. But it was Joe Sinnott. Joe Sinnott influenced the eventual look of the Thing. Because Joe worked out a formula for doing that brick layered skin of Ben's, rather than Jack would draw it in the beginning, and there was no real pattern to it. You knew that he had this lumpy surface, and I'm sure that Sinnott, with the time consideration and also this slick look that was his thing. And eventually Jack is drawing the Thing the way Joe Sinnott inked it.
Yeah.
Whether Jack was so consciously aware of this is a whole nother examination, you know. But I've talked too much right now. Anyway, it's just...
I have a quick question.
Yes.
In terms of the philosophy